Soon, Mom will let me take over the company. The way she talks, Dad's will must have written that I should inherit the estate and the company. Otherwise, she wouldn't let me get away with so much.
One day, when I happened to finish work early and came home, I heard the voices of Michael, who was supposed to be at work, and his wife, Cindy, arguing. It was clear they hadn't noticed I was back. It seems they planned to deceive me and take all the inheritance left by George for themselves. Without being noticed, I left the scene and went back to the office. Once back, I took out the will from George that I had stored in a drawer. No matter how many times I checked, the contents were the same. Michael is misunderstanding this fact, thinking everything will be his. He's walking around with a big head now, but he doesn't yet know the path of ruin that awaits him. My name is Susan, and I'm 55 years old. I'm currently working as the CEO of a cosmetics company. I only took over this company 6 months ago, though. My husband George had established and managed the company. George had suffered a major illness and passed away 6 months ago. Originally an employee at the company, I married George, who was the owner. I continued to work at his side as an employee. However, I never imagined I would suddenly be entrusted with running the company. When George was close to passing, he asked me to continue the company. I couldn't just ignore the wishes of my beloved George. I was just about to discuss the future of the company when I decided to honor his request. The day after hearing my decision, George passed away peacefully. However, I was not allowed the time to immerse myself in memories or even to grieve. The fate of the company and its employees was now in my hands. Fortunately, the employees were very helpful in preparing for the funeral. Even though I thought I was acting as usual, I was grateful for their offer, as I often felt out of sorts and anxious. The warmth of the people gathered was undoubtedly due to George's personality. After all, I myself had married him because I was drawn to his character. Once the funeral was over, based on the personnel decisions George had previously made, I restructured the company. George's management was brilliant, and it was clear he had made many considerations to make my job easier than ever. Even though it was for my sake, the reorganization was done with the consent of the other employees. Thanks to this, there were no complaints from anyone. Thus, the company was able to make a fresh start. It was about 6 months after George had passed away. I had an unexpected visitor.
It's been a while, Mom.
On a holiday, the sudden visitor was my only son, Michael. It had been a full 8 years since I last saw Michael's face. Seeing one's own son after 8 years is unheard of in a normal family. Indeed, there was a deep reason for this. It all started 8 years ago, when George was still alive. At that time, Michael, a college student, had moved out to live on his own. He did not work part-time because he said his studies were too demanding, and George covered all his living expenses. In hindsight, this was a bit abnormal, and I realize now that we were too indulgent. When you really think about it, It's implausible for a college student to be so busy with studies that he can't even work part-time. Far from his studies being demanding, Michael wasn't even attending college. To be more precise, he had dropped out without discussing it with us. All the tuition we had paid was actually received by Michael, who used it along with the money we sent him as living expenses. And when I say living expenses, most of it was not used properly. It's a common tale among college students, but Michael had fallen into a life soaked in gambling. One day, a collection letter from a financial company arrived demanding repayment from Michael, and that's when we discovered everything. By the time we realized it, Michael's debts had ballooned to an amount no college student could handle. George was furious when he found out, but as a parent, he took on the responsibility and paid off all of Michael's debts. Despite this, Michael shamelessly claimed that everything was our fault.
I turned out this way because of you. I didn't do anything wrong.
Hearing this, George finally kicked Michael out of the house. It wasn't quite disownment, but it was effectively a severance of ties. Since then, Michael had disappeared from our lives. Naturally, he did not show up at George's funeral, and we couldn't even inform him. We didn't even know where Michael was living or his contact details. And yet, here he was, appearing suddenly. Apparently, he had somehow heard that George had passed away. Despite my misgivings, I couldn't just turn away my own son, and reluctantly invited Michael into the room.
I'll take over Dad's company.
As soon as he entered the room and sat down, Michael started talking fast. From the moment I saw Michael, I kind of expected it, but hearing it from him directly made me feel even heavier.
We haven't cut off our ties as parent and child, right? So, I should have the right to inherit the company and receive the estate.
Your first conversation with your mother after 8 years is about money and the company. At least you could have paid respects to George's memorial portrait. In the end, Michael never once paid his respects in front of George's memorial throughout his visit. Michael continued his one-sided conversation, repeatedly insisting on his rights. During this, I learned that Michael now had a wife and a child.
Now that I am a father, I am different from before. I want to exercise my rights for my family.
Michael was adamant. But, frankly, I didn't want to continue the conversation with Michael any longer that day. I can't decide anything right now, and I have work later, so let's pick another day. Somehow I managed to send Michael away, but my heart was filled with anxiety. Honestly, if I just ignored him the next time he showed up, he might give up and never come back. But there was a reason I just couldn't ignore Michael. It was written in a letter left by George. Although he hadn't said it directly to me, it seemed he really needed to convey it. The letter read, "Please forgive Michael." Though he had kicked Michael out, George clearly still had regrets about his son. I had been puzzled why George had never mentioned Michael till the end, but he entrusted Michael's future to me through this letter. Despite everything written in the letter, I couldn't abandon Michael at this point. I made up my mind and decided to wait for the next time Michael would visit. Just 2 days later, Michael came to my place. This time, it wasn't just Michael. His wife Cindy and his son Kevin were with him. Kevin was my grandson, but strangely, I felt no deep emotion seeing him. He was just 3 years old and adorable, but I still felt like he was someone else's child. Cindy was 24, 4 years younger than Michael, a typical young woman of today. She probably didn't feel much reality in the fact that I was Michael's mother either. She wasn't nervous and didn't seem to be trying to flatter me at all.
How about it? Your grandson is cute, right?
Michael said proudly, but my feelings remained unchanged. We exchanged a brief introductory conversation before getting right to the main point.
So, about me taking over the company.
I summarized the content of George's letter and told Michael. Almost immediately, a sly smile began to form on Michael and Cindy's faces. But I can't decide right now, and it's not something I can decide on my own. Upon hearing my words, their expressions quickly turned to irritation.
Are you saying you'll ignore Dad's last will? Then let us live here so you won't betray us, Mom. You're all alone now, and you must be worried, right?
That sounds good.
Cindy quickly agreed to Michael's unilateral declaration. It seemed they had already decided this between themselves before. The conversation was forcefully pushed forward as if my refusal was not allowed. When mentioned that there was a will from George, I couldn't say I disliked the idea. Before I knew it, the moving arrangements were underway, and within a week, the 3 of them were set to descend upon us. What exactly is their aim? Sadly, these were the feelings I held towards Michael. Naturally, everyone at the company had a negative opinion of him. There was absolutely no intention to hand over the company itself, and there were numerous opinions against bringing Michael, who had been missing for 8 years, into the company. Everyone said they understood George's wishes, but that it was far too risky. Caught in the middle, I was left deeply troubled. Now, the 3 who moved into my place were also causing me distress.
We have work, so.
They started leaving Kevin at a child care facility on my dime and wouldn't return until late at night.
My dad thought of me when he left that will.
Using that as an excuse, Michael began to rely almost entirely on me for his living. Despite supposedly working from morning till night, they paid no living expenses. Even though I felt doubts and dissatisfaction with this arrangement, I couldn't speak up. Living together, I noticed that Cindy seemed to be juggling several jobs. The laundry included uniforms that seemed to be from a restaurant and work clothes from a factory. Despite her youth, she appeared to be overworking. "Ain't you working too hard?" One day, unable to bear it any longer, I ventured to ask. Then, Cindy gave a slight laugh and said softly,
It can't be helped.
Her words could have been taken in any way, but somehow, any bad feelings I had towards her disappeared. It was true that they were relying on what George left behind, but the extent of her exertion revealed Cindy's fundamentally earnest nature. However, my feelings towards Michael remained unchanged. I wondered, Had I ever been this detached from my son when we lived together? No, that couldn't be. It was because Michael was so dear to us that George and I had listened to his wishes. We were both working, so we found ourselves frequently having to leave the house. We did everything we could as a form of compensation. These actions were undoubtedly out of love. What had changed was not us, but Michael. Although there was a blood connection, the Michael now was a complete stranger to me. Living under the same roof again made this clear. He showed no affection towards his father George, and even after a considerable time since arriving, he hadn't once paid respects at the memorial. In the midst of such a life, one day I managed to leave work early. On that day, despite being tasked with Kevin's care every day, I returned home, my heart racing with excitement at the prospect of finally having some time to relax. I noticed Michael and Cindy's shoes at the entrance, even though they were supposed to be at work. I could hear their voices inside, confirming they were at home.
It's okay. Soon Mom will let me take over the company. With the way she talked, Dad's will must have written that I should inherit the estate and the company. Otherwise, she wouldn't let me do whatever I want like this.
Michael said with a hint of anger in his tone.
Still, wouldn't it be good to try working seriously for once? Do you even realize how much debt you're in? Even after Kevin was born, it's been gambling, nothing's changed.
It seemed like they were arguing and hadn't noticed that I had come home.
That's why we left that rundown place and pushed ourselves onto Mom. If I say it will work out, it will. You just need to keep quiet and follow me.
After Michael's outburst, a loud bang echoed in the room as he probably hit the table. Unnoticed by them, I quietly closed the door and headed back to the office. Finally, Michael's intentions were clear. He planned to take everything from me for himself. As I reread George's letters, I made up my mind. I should abandon the three of them and leave this house now. From their conversation, it was apparent that their life was a mess. Just like his student days, still indulging in gambling and covered in debt. Not working, completely depending on Cindy's meager earnings. Although he left the house, somewhere in his mind he probably thought he could always rely on his parents if things got tough, and had lived up to now with that belief. When their life became unsustainable, unexpectedly, what seemed like good news to Michael had arrived. From these facts, it was clear that if I left the house, their lives would quickly collapse, and they would be lost. However, my decision remained unchanged. I was done letting them mess up my life. With my mind made up, I explained the situation to a few longtime colleagues and headed home. As expected, Michael was out pretending to go to work. During his absence, with help from my colleagues, I moved out all the furniture from the house. We decided to temporarily store these items at the office, essentially clearing out the house. Seeing this, they will realize quickly that I have left. Sure enough, not long after moving the furniture, Michael called.
Mom, what the heck is going on? Why is all the furniture gone from the house?
The moment I answered the phone, Michael's furious voice came through. In the background, I could hear Cindy's flustered voice and Kevin crying.
Why would you do this? Dad told you, right, to leave me various things.
As expected, Michael began to claim that he had a right to George's estate. Hawk the Wool didn't mention leaving any property to you, Michael. With my reply, I could tell that Michael was stunned on the other end.
What are you talking about? You think you can just leave and then hog Dad's estate for yourself?
Hogging or not, George's letter clearly stated, all the company and estate go to Susan. But it was understandable why Michael would think that way.
Please forgive Michael.
George had indeed asked this of me. However, everything he left behind was meant for me. The money and the company were all mine. The letter did say, take care of Michael, but that was a separate matter.
Just come back quickly. Otherwise, I'll sue you.
Right now, no matter how much I explain, Michael isn't going to listen. He's convinced that I've run off with the company and estate that he was supposed to inherit.
See, I told you relying on Susan for everything wouldn't fundamentally solve anything.
Cindy's anguished cry leaked through the phone, having guessed the situation. The reason I struggled until the end to abandon the three of them was because of Cindy. It seemed that George's wishes were unilateral, but ultimately, he left the decision to me. He worried that after his death, I would carry the burden of being a mother who abandoned her son. Of course, he also had regrets about Michael, but his true intention was concern for me. Reuniting with Michael honestly stirred my emotions. In fact, I had accepted their whims and welcomed them back home. I repeated George's words over and over in my mind, agonizing over them. Forgiving Michael was supposed to relieve my mental burden. Ignoring George's feelings was difficult for me. However, accepting Michael as he was would ruin my life, of that I was certain. To truly honor George's wishes, I should make a choice that benefits me. I had made a decision, but Cindy was still a concern. Surely, Michael had ruined her life by dragging her around. Thinking about this made me hesitate in my decision. But I couldn't waver here. I steeled my heart against Cindy's cries and Michael's ranting, and hung up the phone. The day after I left the house, unbelievably, Michael stormed into the office. I had anticipated that he knew which company it was since he learned of George's decease. However, I never expected him to just barge in like this. Michael appeared with Cindy and Kevin in tow.
An appointment? I'm the heir to this company. Just call my mom.
After receiving a plea for help from the receptionist, I headed to the lobby. Michael, it seemed, had not given up yet. As he recognized me, Michael charged at me with incredible force.
You betrayer. Shame on you. How could you abandon your son and grandson? And to top it off, you take all of Dad's estate for yourself.
Most people in the company were aware of the company's policies and Michael's situation since George's decease. However, nobody had anticipated that he would confront us directly like this. Everyone could only watch in stunned silence at the bizarre scene unfolding.
Sure, Dad might have intended to give all the money to my mom. But as Dad's son, I should have the right to inherit this company.
In a normal parent-child relationship, he might have had the right to make such a claim. But Michael had no right to take over the company that belonged to me and George. Even if George had wished for Michael to be the next president, things wouldn't proceed that easily. The opinions of the staff and executives who have supported the company up to now are respected, as is common sense. Without their approval, naturally, it would be impossible to entrust a company to him. If such tyranny were allowed, the company would quickly lose its people. Michael must know the impracticality of what he's demanding. When he was kicked out of the house, he should have realized all of this. But he felt he had no choice. To escape a life drowned in debt, he had to push the limits.
If you say you won't let me take over the company, I'll sue you right now. Cindy, say something.
Perhaps frustrated by my silence, Michael turned to Cindy. Kevin, witnessing his father's bizarre behavior, was crying bitterly. As Cindy gently stroked Kevin's head, she stepped forward.
The one I really need to talk to is you. Enough is enough.
Her pained cry echoed in the lobby, silencing the area for a moment. Michael seemed unable to comprehend Cindy's words.
Huh? What are you saying? You agreed to follow me for Kevin's sake, didn't you?
Michael said mockingly. From this, I was certain. Indeed, Cindy felt trapped and couldn't leave Michael. Perhaps it was her sense of responsibility as a mother. I empathized deeply with Cindy's feelings, as I too struggled with whether to abandon Michael.
Even if you could take over the company, you couldn't handle it. Ever since we met, you hardly worked and were always gambling. Tomorrow will change, tomorrow will change. What was I? Who believed in that?
Tears welled up in Cindy's eyes.
Indeed, I was foolish. Foolish to have fallen for someone like you.
Kevin, looking up at his tearful mother, voiced his concern.
Mom, are you okay? Please don't cry.
To his question, Cindy responded while stroking his head.
Kevin, I'm sorry. From today, it's just going to be the two of us.
Her voice was weak, yet I could sense her firm resolve.
Michael, I am going to live for myself from now on, and I will take full responsibility for raising Kevin. We're done.
The employees, inadvertently caught in this drama, were unable to make a sound, stunned by the unbelievable unfolding before them. Michael, there's no reason for you to stop Cindy. She's long realized that you can't do anything on your own. In fact, your presence makes everyone miserable. These aren't words one should say to their own son, I'm well aware. But I hope my feelings, having to say such things, are understood. I don't need to please anyone. But to the employees watching, I make my silent excuses. There is nothing left for you here. Leave now. If you can't even do that, I will call the police. Michael's face, filled with anger, turned to despair upon hearing the word police. He's been threatened by his own mother to be turned over to the police. For Michael, who's a bit of a softy at heart, that fact was enough to shatter his spirit. Well, it seems like it was more than enough.
Police. What are you talking about? Cindy, say something. I'm not getting a divorce.
Michael completely lost his composure and turned his anger toward Cindy.
Stop. I don't want to call the police in front of Kevin.
fear appeared in Kevin's eyes as he clung to Cindy. It was clear to everyone that Kevin's gaze was not meant for his father. Hearing Cindy's scream, Michael finally collapsed on the spot. He had been rejected by the only person who had ever loved him and devoted herself to him. For Michael, who couldn't do anything on his own, this reality was overwhelmingly crushing. It essentially signified the ruin of his life. "Everyone, I'm truly sorry for bringing my personal issues here. Please go back to your regular duties." With my words, the employees, who had been frozen in place, snapped back to reality. Everyone returned to their routine, acting as if the scene that had just unfolded hadn't happened. At the heart of the area where everyone avoided walking, Michael was on his knees. "Michael, in accordance with your father's will, I'll give you a little kindness. I'm giving you 10 minutes to leave this company. You must move everything out of the house by today. If you have any complaints, hire a lawyer with your own money and file them against me." After extending this last bit of mercy to Michael, I turned to Cindy and Kevin. "Cindy, Kevin, come with me." Leaving Michael in the lobby with a few employees, I led the two to the executive office. I brewed coffee from the built-in coffee maker and offered it to Cindy. I motioned for the two to take a seat, then began to speak. "You followed Michael because you were protecting Kevin." Surprised by my words, Cindy showed an unexpected expression.
If you put it that way, my actions might seem justifiable. But honestly, I had my own desires too. I thought if money came in, I wouldn't have to continue living like this.
Cindy looked down, staring at the coffee on the table. "It's natural to think that way. Ultimately, I abandoned Michael for my own life, but you didn't abandon Kevin. You chose to walk a tough path with Kevin. That decision wasn't just for yourself." As I spoke, tears began to fill Cindy's eyes again. Kevin looked up at his mother and gently rubbed her back. "Our meeting might not have been under the best circumstances, but I don't resent you. No matter what decisions you and I make, Kevin is your son and my grandson. I will keep an eye on your lives." I felt a newfound affection for Kevin that I hadn't felt while we lived together. Because I saw him through Michael, I hadn't developed an attachment, but now I fully recognized him as my dear grandson. As I shared my farts, Cindy cried even more. Kevin, young as he was, seemed to understand that these tears were different from the earlier ones.
"Good to you, Mom."
He continued to smile and rub her back. As for Michael, contrary to our worries, he left the house smoothly. He probably finally understood that we had abandoned him. It seemed he realized that staying here would bring him no benefit anymore. After a while of silence, one day I received a call from the local police at the company.
Are you a relative of Michael, actually?
The officer told me that Michael had been found collapsed in a park. It appeared he had been wandering the streets almost without eating or drinking for several days. He was suffering from malnutrition and mental disarray and was now under protection at a local hospital.
The individual seems to be in a state of confusion, and we understand there have been family issues. Since he is an adult, we leave any further actions up to his family members.
It seemed the hospital staff were aware of the situation and were not forcing me to take him back. Even though we were family, there was no obligation to that extent. I'm sorry for any inconvenience, but I no longer have any involvement with him. It may sound cold, but I firmly stated it.
Understood.
After my words, there was a brief silence, but then a response came. Although physically and mentally worn out, Michael was safe, at least. That fact alone should be enough, without any need for joy or sorrow. But this was my answer. Eventually, Cindy and Michael's divorce was finalized. Having looked after Michael all this time had left Cindy worn out. Naturally, the damages from gambling and the habitual emotional abuse were considered, and she successfully claimed a significant amount in alimony. This left Michael literally penniless, and, despite his deteriorating mental and physical health, committed to a tough job. It was a just retribution for the years of suffering he had caused Cindy. What George really wanted for me, I may never know. What would George think of the decisions I made? From what I know, having spent so long with him, I'm sure George would have approved of this outcome. Having witnessed such a loving father up close, did Michael feel nothing? If he had loved Cindy, even if clumsily, and lived each day earnestly despite being poor, surely this would not have been the outcome. Or perhaps, the day we parted ways, this outcome was already determined. In any case, Michael had betrayed Cindy's kindness and drowned in his desires. We were not being selfish. We did what we could, and beyond that, we reclaimed our own lives. The company regained its vibrancy like in George's days, and with strategies leveraging the strengths of a female entrepreneur, it continues to grow daily. Cindy and I both lost our husbands. However, having a partner isn't the only form of happiness in life. I have the company that George left behind, and Cindy has Kevin. Isn't that fact enough? Cindy plans to obtain her nail technician certification while working within her limits. The alimony you receive from Michael might as well be considered your money originally, so there's no need to feel disgusted by relying on it. I reassured her repeatedly.
As a nail technician, I can work from home. That way, I'll have more time with Kevin.
Cindy's face, now frequently smiling, had completely shed its previous gloom. Every time I see Cindy laughing with Kevin, I am reminded that my judgment was not wrong,